We'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karimi, a graduate student at the Graduate School of Design. This is the second of the GSD's panels today. So the first was the housing one, and we hope several of you had gotten the chance to join us for that one. And this is the second, Syria's refugees. So if you have missed the first round of thank yous, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to the moderator, panelists. And on behalf of Harvard Arab Weekend, the Harvard Arab Alumni Association, and the GSD, thank you all for being here. We're really excited to what should be an extremely provocative and interesting panel. This panel has a means of framing change in the discussion and the scale of looking at the Syrian refugee crisis. And our moderator for this panel will be Diane Davis of the GSD. She's the professor of urbanism and development at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, as well as the co-director of the MDes, Masters of Design, Risk and Resilience program at the Graduate School of Design. Her works examine the relations between urbanization and national development, comparative international development, the politics of urban development policy, and conflict cities. She has explored topics ranging from historic preservation, urban social movements, and identity politics to urban governance, fragmented sovereignty, and state formation to planning theory. Her current research focuses on transformation of cities of the Global South, particularly the urban social, spatial, and political conflicts that have emerged in response to globalization, informality, and political or economic violence. So without further ado, our moderator.
Thank you, Ali. I'm not going to speak very long because I know everybody is here to learn from our three incredible panelists. As you know, that the topic of this panel is the Syrian refugee crisis, I would add. I guess you would, even if you weren't following developments in the Arab world, you would have been living in a cave to not understand the terrible problems that we're seeing both within Syria and in the larger region with respect to displaced peoples and refugees, both within and outside their own national borders. What we want to do today is talk a little more about this problem, probably is experienced from the perspective of the refugees themselves. We have people with an interest in reconstruction and community development who've looked at the health problems related to the crisis, as well as the issue of shelter and housing for refugee populations. We have three great panelists. I'm going to introduce them one by one. We'll start with our very first panelist, Señor Pablo Blanco. He's the member of the board of directors. Oh no, I don't speak French, so I want to say, well, I'll say Doctors Without Borders, known as MST. MSF. He's been working with MSF since 2002 and has had a variety of positions in more than 20 countries in Africa, the Middle East, and America. Lately as a country director. And I wanted to mention that not only has he managed emergency relief operations for internally placed people and refugees from Sudan, Yemen, and other African countries. Last summer, he spent a couple months leading MSF in its operations in Aleppo, Syria. So he has direct experience with the situation in Syria. And we'll start with you, and then each panelist will speak about trying to aim for 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. Starting with.
Okay, thank you very much, Diane. According to the last data from the United Nations, nowadays there are 2.2 million refugees, Syrian refugees, in the neighboring countries of Syria. These 2.2 million people is equal to thinking of the whole population of Chicago or of Beirut. Every single man, woman, and child basically living in their houses and going to live to tents, prefabs, or just try to find a small apartment where they should share their small room with 1, 2, or 3 more families. In addition to these 2.2 million refugees, there are 4.2 million internally displaced people, people who have left their houses, their homes in Syria, and they are fleeing from violence and from chaos, looking for other places that they feel safer inside the country. And again, these 4.2 million people, you can imagine, is something like the population of Los Angeles or the whole population of Damascus. We are talking about a movement of population that we have rarely seen in the last years, both in terms of scale and in terms of speed. So what I will try to do in these 10 minutes is to answer 3 questions. First question, why all these Syrian people are moving, are escaping? And some answers are obvious, others not, as you will see. Second question, how many more refugees can we expect in the coming months? And third question, what are the consequences of this refugee crisis in the neighboring countries? So let's go for the first one. So why do people flee? So first of all, obviously the violence. The levels of violence, excuse me, levels of violence inside the country are still very high, in spite of the new advances in terms of potential agreements about chemical weapons. Violence is still very high. To give you one example, just 3 weeks ago, strong combats in Al-Safira, in the southeast of Aleppo, displaced in a couple of days more than 130,000 people in just a couple of days. People who basically have been trying to move north, finding a safe place for them. In addition to this, even far from the areas where there is direct violence because of combats, the Syrian army is following a policy of basically making the life of the population in the opposition-held areas as difficult as possible. And this involves basically throwing missiles or bombing areas which are basically civil areas. And so, for example, while I was in Aleppo during the summer, in Aleppo city, basically in the opposition-held area, an area where there is not any, like I would say, strategic objective. There will be 4, 5, 6, 10 missiles or obuses falling every day. So of course, as you can imagine, it's not really a best place for living. And third issue related to violence, the action of the jihadist groups, which are, as all of you have heard, they are getting more and more power in Syria, and they have been extremely active, especially now against the Kurdish population in the north. And their attacks have provoked the movement of also tens or hundreds of thousands of Kurdish people. But violence is not the only reason why people flee. Second reason is that in the areas under control of the opposition, basically the economy has collapsed and the basic services are really in dire states. To give you again, to come back to the example of Aleppo, in the area of Aleppo under control of the opposition, well, the government of Syria obviously is not there. So basically, we have a city of 1 million people, where the people who are trying to run the basic services in the city are a group of 30, 40 volunteers, most of them in their 20s or early 30s, trying to run a city of 1 million people, basically without any budget and with really very basic knowledge of how to do this. So as you can imagine, they are doing, in my opinion, an amazing job, a great job, but it's basically like a mission impossible. I think of services, one of the big issues is health. Health services are a big problem in the whole of Syria, and especially in the opposition area. So first issue, of course, is that the army has followed also a policy of systematically destroying the hospitals that they don't control. Okay, I will like to show you. I would like to show you this photo. This picture is a picture of Aleppo, and this mountain of rubble that you see there is basically Dar al-Sifa hospital. That was the main hospital in Aleppo until 1 year ago. Okay? So it received several strikes by airplanes and by artillery until basically didn't exist anymore. So now in Aleppo, if you want to receive any health service, you need to go to one of these makeshift hospitals that normally are existing in the basement of the buildings. But even these hospitals that are in very precarious situation, they are still regularly attacked by the Syrian army. Another issue to take into consideration is that the Syrian health system was recognized as quite good, as one of the best, a very good one in the Middle East. The average life expectancy in Syria before the war was 75 years, which is similar to the life expectancy in Hungary, Serbia, and Poland. This means that the kind of sickness that you can expect and you need to treat are very different to the kind of sickness you need to treat in other like poor areas. So basically, you are talking about cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetes. You are talking about diseases that need a quite sophisticated health system. And basically, this health system has collapsed. So the people who need these services, they don't have any other choice but basically flee the country or die. So going to my second question, how many refugees can we expect in the next months or next years in this crisis? Okay, so this in the picture you can see the latest data from the UN and from the Humanitarian Information Unit of the State Department. As I was saying at the beginning, now the official figures are 2.2 million refugees, are around 2.4 IDPs, internal displaced people inside Syria. The thing which is, I mean, in addition to these numbers, which are already horrifying, the thing that we need to take into consideration is that most of these refugees, most of these 2.2 million refugees, they were displaced people inside Syria first of all. So basically, when people decide to flee their houses in Syria, they try to look for a safe place inside the country, if they can, close to their cities, and then it's after several movements from one place to the other looking for safety, when they really decide that there is no safe place they can find in Syria, then they will move to a refugee camp or to another country. So right now, we have 4.4 million IDPs. We could say they are basically 4.4 potential refugees in the pipeline. So we need to understand that the number of refugees could very easily double in the next months or in the next year. And then the third question, of course, what are the consequences of this great movement of population? So the most obvious, humanitarian. We are talking now about 2.2 million, eventually 4 million people in the next months or year. Okay, we need to provide services for them, education, health, and it's obvious that Jordan, Syria, Iraq are really in a very difficult situation to provide that. A second consequence is the risk of further radicalization of the Syrian youth. And this is something we really need to think about. Just try to put yourself into the skin of a young Syrian who is now in a refugee camp in Turkey or in Jordan. Living conditions are very bad, especially compared with the Syrian living standards before the war. Whole families living in tents or in small apartments, okay, often queues to get water or food. In many refugee camps, refugees cannot leave the camps. They basically live like almost like in a prison. It's okay, I don't need it, all right? So they don't have any capacity to make a living or just to feel they are useful. So of course, if you are a Sunni now in such conditions, the message of the jihadist is very compelling. The West and other Arab countries have abandoned the Syrians. If you want to fight, those who have the weapons, who have the organization, who have the reputation are the jihadist groups now inside Syria. And in addition, if these moments of social collapse, the jihadists offer a very compelling moral code that everyone understands. So, and the third element in terms of consequences of the crisis that I really hope that the other panelists will deal with in detail is the risk of political instability. So Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, they probably don't have the capacity to control their borders. So the flux of refugees, if it continues, it will be very difficult to stop by them. And if the figures we're talking about prove to be true, we can think of a situation where in a few months, in 1 year, basically almost 20% of the Jordan population will be refugees, and eventually 30–40% of the Lebanese population will be refugees, Syrian refugees. So it's an amazing challenge for these countries. So as a conclusion, a massive increase of aid inside Syria, especially inside the opposition areas, could mitigate the crisis and eventually reduce the flow of refugees, but probably this will not be enough. So if if the warring parties, and especially if the regional and global powers who are behind the warring powers do not manage to find an agreement, to find a solution for Syria, we will face a human tragedy of a scale that we have not seen in many years, and in addition, a risk of several neighboring countries going into very serious political destabilization. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say that I neglected to mention that Mr. Marco holds a master's degree in international relations from the Instituto Universitario Ortega y Gasset and a degree in public administration here from the Kennedy School. So I know we're going to come back to some of the organizational issues and the public policy issues. Next, we will hear from Rabih Shibli. He's the Director of Community Projects and the Development Unit at the American University in Beirut. He is an affiliated faculty member at the Department of Landscape Architecture, which he joined after receiving his master's degree in urban design from American University Beirut. In September 2006, he founded and directed Beit Junub, a nonprofit civil organization that was heavily involved in the reconstruction process in the aftermath of the July War. He's published several chapters for books looking at post-war reconstruction, focused particularly on Lebanon, as well as some general articles about the right to landscape, contesting landscape and human rights, and reconceptualizing boundaries, urban design in the Arab world. And most recently compiled and edited 2 volumes entitled Remodeling Harshscapes, a new reading of problematic narratives. And I just want to say that Professor Shibli is really interested in breaching the theory-practice divide, and I think this is one challenge that you can speak to us about in your presentation today.
Thank you for the introduction. I'll be brief. I'll just take the 10 minutes thing. Just to put my presentation in perspective, 1 month ago we had a meeting with the UN representative in the region, Mr. Nigel Fisher, and we formed a core group from AUB, and this is the first time I'm going to present this paper, which is form of a policy paper of how can we maybe do things better. And this is on a Lebanon's profile, crisis management. My presentation will cover those 6 main themes. First, I will give some figures on the unfolding nightmare. Second, on the political condition in Lebanon, which is dissociation leading to dissolving of the country. Third, who's in charge of the relief efforts. 4 is about the soaring anxieties. 5 is my suggestion. How can we do things better by decentralized crisis management teams? And the final point, if I can maybe put it, lead to this one, which is the role of AUB in the crisis. This is one of the maps produced by UNHCR. The circles represent the scale of refugees in the different countries, and you can see that Lebanon have the largest number of refugees, and it is the smallest country within all the other countries. The specificity of the Lebanese case, those numbers have been updated a month ago. It was 805 and 85,000 were awaiting registration. The Lebanese government's numbers is 1.3 million. And in my meetings with all of the international agencies, the informal talk is expecting 2 million by next year. The alarming figures is that, and these are very accurate figures, we have the ratio of refugees is 30% of the Lebanese population. And by a study done by the World Bank, Lebanon was expecting to reach 4.7 million by 2040, and development projects have been set accordingly. Now, we have already in Lebanon 5.3. Influx of refugees. Every day we're receiving 7,000 and 6,000 awaiting to be registered. During the Qusayr battle, the number of the registered on a daily basis were 13,000 entering the country. Lebanon is a very small country. It's 10,400 square kilometers, and the refugees are scattered along 1,400 locations. Children and teenagers are 52%. And the best estimates is that 20% of those attend schooling. In our projects, it's zero. We don't have it. We're working with almost 3,000 children. None of them is going to schools. Influx of refugees have caused a decrease of wage that's noted in the agriculture sector alone by 50% in the past 2 years. Decrease. $7.5 in cumulative economic losses by the end of 2014. Number of refugees, like I said, is expected to be 2 million by next year, which is half of the population. And UNHCR, because of the shortage of funding, have scaled down their health program from, health is one of the sectors, but they have scaled down all the other sectors from 85 to 75% coverage and only covering the critical cases. 70% of refugees also cannot meet their basic food and non-food items, needs. Okay, so basically they're living in very dire conditions. They're either going to unfinished structures, these are some pictures, or into the new trend, unfinished structures. And when I say unfinished structures, it's like the leftover spaces in Lebanon, spaces where only rats can go and live in. There isn't any infrastructure that's supporting it. They are really living in hell. The new trend is that they're going, when we had a government, there was taken a decision to not to have camps. So the Lebanese found, and the refugees found a leeway, which are informal tented settlements. So you're in the biqa', you rent your land, your piece of land for laborers. And they transform it into what we call now informal tented settlements. And these are pictures. This is the convention. And I just need to tell you that now the temperature night times in biqa' is -5 degrees centigrade. It's going to snow. Their life will be living hell. And just take a look at the toilets. And this is another issue maybe we can raise if we have some time. Okay, the second point is the political. We have the Ba'adda Declaration. I'm not going to talk a lot about it. Then we had the government, the cabinet, once they convened and issued the response plan. 2 months after, in March 2013, the government resigned. The dissociation policy in Lebanon now is a joke. Everyone talks about it as a joke because Hezbollah have directly intervened, and we're seeing dead bodies coming every day, and they're not ashamed about it. They claim it, and then which are representing Lebanon is about 2 blocks. March 14, March 8. March 8 is mainly supported by the Shia. March 14 by the Sunnis. So it's Iran, Saudi Arabia, US, Russia, whatever you want to call it. And then we have the Salafis, which are also intervening in this ordeal, and we don't have numbers documenting the number of casualties, but it's known. This culminated in the 2 big explosions. First one on August 15, the car bomb explosion in Dahi, in Hezbollah stronghold, killing 27, and the twin cars bomb, which happened in front of a Sunni mosque in Trablus, in Tripoli, killing 42. Now the trend in Lebanon is Amin Zete, which is because there's no trust in the Lebanese army forces anymore. Communities are practicing their own security contingency plans. Refugees are still entering. It's a very porous borders, and they're entering any way they can into the country, and it's still happening every day. Oh, this is rotated. Okay, who's in charge? This is a plan produced, set by also UNHCR. They're extremely efficient in their operations. They're covering the 5 regions. Lebanon is 8 districts, muhafazat. They're covering the 5 districts, the big districts, and they have a district for the camps. So they're covering all the sectors, and they're cooperating with 41 international NGOs. Then you have the Arab Fund. So UNHCR, you have documentation of all the money where they're receiving it, and I call them, they collaborate with the liberal NGOs. The Arab Fund, we don't also have clear numbers about where is it that they come getting their funds and how are they distributing the funds, but we know that they're collaborating with faith-based organizations, Islamic organizations. Then we have the third party, which is the government, which is doing, it's a caretaker government. We have the Ministry of Social Affairs represented by Minister Wael Abu Faour, and we can say it's kind of a one-man show because they're limited, they don't have the resources, neither the human resources or the financial and technical resources. They just attend one meeting in Beirut with the UNHCR, and they're not able to carry on or develop projects. Soaring anxieties. In the latest report, UNHCR raised the issue of racism, or about, in regard to the Ministry of Interior, because we have curfew measures in most of the municipalities, imposing that, putting curfews on Syrian refugees from 6 to 6. Another ministerial committee has been formed to shut down the businesses for Syrian refugees, because the Lebanese are saying we cannot find any jobs anymore. And the minister was very happy to say that within 3 weeks they shut down 400 shops. But they cannot do that with the informal market. UNHCR thinks that they can alleviate these tensions by opening up community centers. Community centers is adding to the tensions. Community centers, they're claiming they want to have one community center per 5,000. So we will be having 1,400 community centers, which is creating a new infrastructure, duplicating that, and totally disconnected from the local community, local society. Okay, this is the finding that I'm suggesting based on the research that we've done. It is a decentralized issue. We cannot say we have a very weak government, but still we have to upgrade or deal with it from within. We need to find a local party to collaborate with. There are 3 systems of governance, and again, if we look at the latest example, when those international agencies came into South Lebanon, and South Lebanon maybe covers maximum 15% of the country, they intervened in all of these 350 villages, but the scale was much limited, and we were dealing with local communities, not refugees. And their impact, after assessment, very minimal impact they had on the grounds. So this is the chart that we have now. We have 3 levels of organizations in Lebanon. We have the central government, and then we have something called governor or muhafiz, districts. Then overlooking the Kazas, which are 26, also overlooking the work of municipalities, which are 986, very weak municipalities. On the other hand, we have the UN agencies, which the UN agencies they update the central government on their works, and we have the Arab funds, which directly connects with the refugees, and there is a major divide between both. We have 2 different separate infrastructures. What needs to be done is that there is something by law in 1972 for the muhafiz, for the governance. It's a local council body within the muhafaza system. This needs to be empowered, and this needs to be empowered with 7 key sectors, which deals with the information, water sanitation, child support and gender-based violence, non-food items, education, health, and most importantly, how a whole section needs to be addressing how to alleviate tensions between refugees and the host communities. Definitely they will be coordinated and empowered by UN agencies who have a lot of experience in this domain. They will be implementing projects with municipalities within their districts. And the last section, which really need to have some focus when we address it in Lebanon, is how to engage refugees in municipal public works along ecological lines. And this needs maybe a whole presentation by itself. This needs to have the input of the universities, where the think tank is, and in direct collaboration with municipalities. AUB have what we have done. I think we were the first university to bring this taboo into the local community. Before I came, we screened one movie called "It's Not Who We Are," نحن مو هيك, and we were amazed that we had more than 2,000 Lebanese just came in. We filled up 3 auditoriums. Everyone wanted to know what's happening and how can we be engaged. give us the mechanism, the venues for us to engage. So we are going hands-on. We are working on water, sanitation, and shelter. And when I say that, it's just simple toilets and water tanks, and rehabilitating some shelters. This is an interesting for the architects. I spoke about it yesterday. IKEA have developed this model, which by all means cannot work, and it's not working in Lebanon. Our teams have set up very simple mechanism, which is this simple structure, which can really revolutionize the way the refugees are living. We built many of these models. Students have done it in one day. We did all the calculations, the engineering. It can sustain weathering and the heating and the cooling for at least 5 years. The IKEA model is 10,000 euros. Our model is like $1,200. And we're now building another one, a prototype on campus. The second sector is we are working on education, and it's just literacy programs, nothing more. The third is we're venturing into mobile teams and clinics, sending volunteers, doctors all over the country. And the final one, which really needs a lot of time, is how to engage also in municipal public works. Maybe in the discussion I'll discuss why. And we have the unit that I'm leading, we have a long experience in this domain, and we believe that it might maybe address or put on the table of discussion how can you seriously alleviate these tensions and maybe alter the conception of refugees from a burden to an asset within a limited period of time. Thank you.
Amazing. Can't wait till the question and answer session. Now we're going to turn to David Smith. David is the founder of Affordable Housing Institute here located in Boston. He brings 35 years of experience with complex affordable housing transactions, programs, and policies, and a global reputation for adaptive innovation, passion, and problem solving. We need a lot of that in this issue. The Affordable Housing Institute seeks long-lasting positive impact in changing housing finance ecosystems, preferably for the better. And he's been involved in that initiative both in the United States and a dozen countries around the world, also fusing theory and practice. I think that's the theme here on the panel. So, David?
Actually, I think the theme is Rabih's theme. How do you turn this situation from burdens into assets? I did a talk at Tulane that was titled Turning Slums into Assets. And I'm going to start in a somewhat odd place. If you have not read Kurt Vonnegut's novel Slaughterhouse-Five, this would be a good time to go get it and read it. Because the seminal event in Slaughterhouse-Five is the bombing of Dresden, which destroys the city. And Kurt Vonnegut experienced the bombing of Dresden, and it took him 24 years to process emotionally the bombing of Dresden. And he eventually wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, which is a novel where time is all jumbled up. And the reason I'm asking you to think about time being all jumbled up is because, as Vonnegut says in the beginning of Slaughterhouse-Five, there is nothing intelligent to say about a massacre. And there is nothing intelligent to say about the tragedy in Syria. So I'm not going to talk about what's going on inside Syria. I'm going to talk about what I think is the solution, even though in describing the solution, you're all going to say it's impossible. And it will only become possible when people have gone through despair of the kind that Pablo and Rabih are describing and experiencing. And I'm going to illustrate this through Haiti. Because if you remember, in March of 2010, 3.5 years ago, a 7.0 earthquake struck Haiti, Port-au-Prince, and 220,000 people died. 220,000 people died. And for approximately 3 years after Haiti, after that earthquake, Haiti was governed by what became known as a joke as the Republic of NGOs. And all of the mistakes that Rabih was describing in his presentation have been made in Haiti. And I'm going to tell you about them. And in that 3-year period, we did no work in Haiti because it was impossible to do work given those conditions. So, what's the fastest growing city in Jordan? How many Jordanians live there? None. Let's just think about that for a second. It's 6 miles south of the Syrian border. Okay? 160,000 people live there. It didn't exist a year and a half ago. 6,000 arrive every week, more or less. Nobody quite knows. It's called a refugee camp, and you heard me say, I heard you say, no Jordanians live there. That's a curious phenomenon. It happens that the 21st century, aside from being the century of urbanization, is going to be the century of urban disaster. Because it is a fact that a greater number of human beings and a larger portion of the built environment live in cities. And those cities are increasingly disaster vulnerable. Now, this is not a climate change panel. We're not going to go into any of that stuff. I'm just going to observe that between natural disasters like earthquakes and tsunamis and hurricanes, typhoons in Manila, the Philippines, and man-made disasters, we have a lot more built environment being destroyed. And we have a lot more of humanity's aggregate value in the built environment. And so the stories Pablo was telling about the destruction of the hospital, aside from the fact that that is the logical extension of the theory of war for the bombing of Dresden, it also represents a massive destruction of wealth. Societies that come out of wars like this are dirt poor, literally. So, 7.0 earthquake hits downtown Port-au-Prince. Right now, more than 45 million people are displaced globally. They are displaced internationally, they're displaced within countries. And this is the first important point. Always, their movement is rural to urban. And always, it's irreversible. I know, I see somebody shaking their head, but they move to urban places. And the movement is, in large, irreversible. The cost of disasters averages $100 billion annually. It speeds up urbanization. It certainly speeded up in Port-au-Prince. And these refugee situations average 17 years, UN average. If you're in a protracted refugee situation, it's going to be there for 17 years. So here's my first beef. I don't like the word refugee. And I really don't like the word camp. When they say camp, I think of a place in the wilderness. I went there for vacation. It's temporary. We brought all our stuff. It's fun. It's a holiday from real life. And we're going to go home soon. And none of those things are true in the places that we're talking about. And when you say refugee, I think of someone who's taking refuge. The implication is that this too shall pass. I'm just waiting for something to change. I'm passive. I'm just taking refuge. Get under the desk, duck and cover, and in the definition of refugee, I'm away from home. My home is somewhere else. So that's Port-au-Prince about 4 months after the earthquake. And so what's the difference? This is the other point about Slaughterhouse 5. What's the difference between a refugee and an immigrant? A state of mind, 2 states of mind. Mine, as the person who moved, and yours, as the country I moved to. So, here's what happened in Haiti. Your mileage may vary. Terrible things happen. Lots of them. The damage is always greatest in the urban environment. The people died in Haiti not because of the earthquake directly, but because the buildings they lived in were structurally unsound and fell down the hillsides like Lego bricks in an avalanche and crushed people. A 7.0 earthquake hit San Francisco, 63 people died. A 7.0 earthquake hit Valparaiso, Chile, the same time roughly as the Port-au-Prince earthquake, 525 people died. 7.0 earthquake hits Port-au-Prince and 220,000 people die. Death and damage occur most in informal settlements and rapidly urbanizing environments. Also, the infrastructure is destroyed. whether by nature or by deliberate strategy. Because if you want to wreck a population and defeat their war-making capacity, destroy their infrastructure. So, that creates an immediate humanitarian crisis, and it accelerates the movement of people, and it overwhelms the government's capacity to respond. It overwhelms the city's capacity to absorb people. It overwhelms the infrastructure. This is what happened in Haiti. So, there's immediately a global humanitarian response. The upwelling of capital is enormous. In the safe places, normally it's the U.S. military who airlifts in all kinds of stuff. The U.S. military has this fantastic capacity to airlift in stuff. And the government starts waiving laws to enable the free stuff to be airlifted in. So, look at this in terms of urbanization outcomes. Resettlement camps sprout. Now, the thing about a resettlement camp, there's no infrastructure. There's no water. There's no sanitation. There's no roads. There's no electric. By the way, there's no schools. There's no hospitals. There's no businesses. Okay? And people heat and cook with charcoal and paraffin, because that's what's available, which are about kind of the worst things to heat and cook an urban environment with, but they're cheap. The city normally chooses to isolate the refugees because you're refugees. We have to put you behind fences. You talked about that, Pablo, and you talked about the differences between them being in refugee camps and the like. And in come what are known in Haiti as the stupid shelters. So all of a sudden, you have a massive increase in unemployment and people are at loose ends, courtesy of the UN or USAID or whomever. And the relief agencies start giving out free stuff, lots and lots of free stuff. And after a while, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, the relief agencies get tired of this. Their relief agency model is commando raid. Go in, give stuff away for free, stabilize the situation, declare victory, exit, photo op, next disaster. But they leave behind a place of bad hygiene, high unemployment, tribal and ethnic connections, and by the way, proximity to the rest of the city. So, let's go back to Zatari for a second. That's the habitation. It's 2.8 square miles. 160,000 people live there. 6,000 a day, up to 6,000 a day, arrive. It's completely self-organized, completely self-laid out. It has 12 districts. It has twice the per square mile population density of Manhattan, of New York City, okay? And it just keeps expanding. It has 3,000 shops, it has a taxi service, it has informal schools, it has soccer fields, it has informal hospitals. Why don't you call that a city? It's a city in everything but name. In fact, it's a slum in 6 months. And these people are not going home in 6 months. So, relief agencies, please stop calling yourself relief agencies. Start calling yourself recovery and redevelopment agencies. Think about the fact that a city is an extremely complex intervention, where success is measured over time and there is no exit strategy. You may not like it, Kingdom of Jordan, that Zatari is there, but it's not going to be there anytime soon. So once you accept that you're going to redevelopment, you stop thinking short term and start thinking long term. You stop thinking in terms of exit strategy and saying this is part of a landscape. You stop thinking about tents. You think about housing, so I like what you were doing, Rabih. You stop thinking about free and you start thinking about investment of labor, investment of time, investment of money. You create a vision and you present it. And you stop calling them refugees. They are immigrants. Maybe they didn't want to be immigrants. Maybe they'll be immigrants at some point. But they are immigrants right now. They can't go home again. By the time they go home, there is no home. They come to a new place for a new purpose. They will build your city if you give them a chance. They will change your country if you give them a chance. They will blend cultures. All of those are Ellis Island. We have Cuban Americans in Miami Some of them are 75 years old and still talk about going back to Havana. We have Vietnamese Americans in Texas. We have Vietnamese Americans in Texas who go back to Ho Chi Minh City and call it Saigon. We have Mexican Americans in Los Angeles, some of whom even root for the U.S. in soccer. We have Chinese Americans in New York. And we have 40,000 Somali Americans in Minneapolis. Once you start seeing them not as passive victims, but as future citizens, unexpected arrivals, you change your mentality. And unfortunately, I think it's going to take a year or a year and a half before the recipient governments realize this reality. They are going from this to that. And you can help them, or you cannot help them. Thank you very much.
We're going to open it out to questions. I just did want to make one comment about what I see kind of as the arc of this excellent panel. And thank you, Ali, for organizing this. Is that in a way we start thinking about refugees from the perspective of the citizens themselves. I'm sorry to use the word refugees, I got to find a different language. But the citizens that are being displaced, internally displaced, have moved out because of political conflict and economic lack of economic opportunities. But what we've been thinking about is the focus is much not so much only on those flows of people, but on the kind of larger political context of the receiving countries and what politics and organizational structures and strategies need to be put in place in order to be able to accommodate these flows in ways that are productive for everybody. And that's a kind of a sea change in the way we think about refugees. And it really brings us into the world of institutional design and politics and power and kind of larger discussions about the political economy of development. And nobody is really framing the problem in that way. So I want to thank the panel for really widening our understanding of the complexity of the problem. That, of course, raises a much higher bar for thinking about solutions. It's not just about getting the right tent or the right, latrine or etc.
It's how you enable these people to make a living while they're in their new place.
Right, and this is an issue about sovereignty and conflict over governance and sovereign authority. So with that, I think we're going to open it out to questions. I'm sure there are questions from the audience. Who wants to? Please.
Thank you so much for thanks to David for this. I hope that we can see soon. We can stop saying about Palestinians and Syrians as refugees in the Arab world. How, from your experience, how do you think that we can the Syrians immigrants in the Arab world be able to behave in those hosting countries to avoid kind of conflicts with the original people of those countries? I mean, the fact that we have now, unfortunately, the majority of Lebanese, Egyptian, Jordanian, they are not that happy with that, and that's really understandable. I remember when thousands of Iraqis fled to Syria, Syrians were not that happy that time. So how normally those people should be able to behave to avoid conflicts in those countries? Should they get involved in the community? Should they or try to avoid the conflict?
I can talk about the Lebanese model. Like I said, we don't have we have a very meager infrastructure for policy and governance. The UN agencies have been setting up a whole new infrastructure for the refugees, and I believe that they are catering for increasing the tensions between the refugees and the Lebanese population. I'll give you an example. The 50% decrease in the agriculture sector, when you go talk to the Lebanese, he will tell you, I'm sick and tired of those refugees, even among the most welcoming host communities. Because at the beginning of the situation, many villages in Lebanon were very welcoming, but now They've been there for a year, 2 years, 3 years. They're getting cash for rent. They're getting cash coupons for food items. This is at least what, and there's no level of engagement between the Lebanese and the refugees. So the Lebanese say, when they look at those big trucks, white trucks, vans, coming and distributing the funds or whatever it is, maybe they're very simple stuff, and they don't know about it, the Lebanese will think, no, they're taking like maybe gold. So and they are saying that the Syrians are competing because they're getting all of this for free. We're not receiving anything, so they can definitely work for much less in the labor sectors. And historically, the Syrian labor force have been very efficient in Lebanon, but they were like 100, 200, 300,000. Now the number has quadrupled, and there isn't any. That's why my focus is really finding a mechanism, a structure. Those people, like David has said, even the UN agencies, their plans are, there are two sorts of plans. They're planning for 5 years projects, and they're planning for 10 years projects. If the war stops in Syria next year, and the latest report is that the reconstruction needs $80 billion, when will they reconstruct? When they will move back? And we know many of them are not going to move back. So we need to find a mechanism. I have another, maybe to end up my... I think there's something happening in the Levant. And I don't want to say it here, but maybe Lebanon, as we know, it has dissolved. The porous borders, we cannot just claim that they're just porous. Hezbollah's intervention has a big price. The Salafis' intervention maybe has a big price. We might be looking into a new form of political geography. Those won't be migrants or refugees anymore. They will be the civilians of the Levant. Are we able to deal with these facts? Will Lebanon, part of next to Za'atari, from Skandaron in South Lebanon to Skandaron next to Turkey, be the belt of minorities? Are we looking for a new form of political geography? These are the big questions. We cannot take the Syrian crisis lightly and dealing. And now what's happening? I'm working on the subject in Lebanon for the past 2 years. I haven't been in any hardcore discussion about the issue. And believe me, I'm not blaming. I'm not blaming the international community about the work, but they cannot understand the hidden agendas and the informal codes that we work with. We don't work by codes. We work by informal urf. Our life is dependent ala a'raf, informal codes. When you come with those big agencies, the monsters, how the hell do you think that you're gonna be? How the hell you gonna think that you'll figure out the last thing? Also, when a big consultant with a big firm came with, she wanted to alleviate the tension. She said she thought that she'll be giving capacity buildings for the Syrians to start doing like the artisanat. And when I asked them, this is to boost the economy, I asked her, do you have the market? She said, no, the Lebanese will buy the products. These are the ideas. And we are it's our problem, the Lebanese, the community's problem, and we're not thinking about it. If the crisis will end, the NGOs will leave to another crisis zone, and we'll have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. The only thing I would add is stop giving away free stuff. That's the government side. And his point is absolutely right. And if I was an immigrant in one of these communities, I would make it a point of pride to pay for things as much as I could. Pay in work, pay in labor, pay in money, pay in anything. Because the free handout envy, the other thing that happens in Haiti, you're a fool if you pay for things. Because if you wait long enough and you're photogenic, the next group of people with the white van are going to show up and give you free stuff.
I find really your point of view extremely challenging, interesting, David. But the thing is that, thinking of Lebanon, I'm far from being an expert in the country, but if really we start thinking of all the people who are arriving to Lebanon as immigrants, people who will be staying in Lebanon instead of refugees, people who will stay hopefully for a while. I mean, does the Lebanese political system accept this?
There isn't any political system. No, I'm serious. We've been having a caretaker government for the last 2 years, and it's not going to be again. I think this is my major concern. Is last time Derek Plumby, the UN representative, he was at AUB, and I asked him a question, and he replied in a totally different, gave me a totally different reply. I asked him, because from what I'm seeing, as there is an agenda, a UN agenda of dealing with the transition phase, and they're not giving you the real insight about it. But when you see the work of those NGOs, those big monsters, and you see the support of the UN agencies and the setting of a totally independent, highly efficient infrastructure, you see, no, there's something very, very serious going to happen. And we are totally kept in the dark. And that's why I think we are giving the blessing of not having any source of governance.
Well, and in Haiti, the emergence of the NGOs enabled the dysfunction of the Haitian government and increased the level of land stealing, for example. So before the UN could even say, or USAID could even say, we're going to build a new town development out here, the land would already be invaded. The rich family would already have bought a bunch of it. Somebody would surface with a piece of paper that got signed by Papa Doc claiming they owned it in 1955. And then you have to pay a lot of compensation. And then the NGOs go, oh, we're stuck. So yes, people orient around the power and the money.
You in the back.
I'm Jordanian who's been working at the Zahra Institute for the past 2 years.
Wow.
And I was wondering about your comment regarding providing chances to the Syrian immigrants. Jordan is a country with very limited resources. We're still trying to figure ways to provide chances to the Iraqi immigrants as well. I mean, we've been going from one crisis to another. So what solutions do you propose in providing chances? What do you, like, by providing chances, how can we provide chances? If we need, Jordan itself needs help with what we have already. I mean, it's a crisis that's affecting all the Arabs in any
Right, and this is what things like the Islamic Development Bank and the African Development Bank and the World Bank are for, is to provide capital on concessionary basis for this kind of stuff. But the government has to ask for it.
Can I just say that I'm sorry, I just add to this that piggybacking on your comment, that in a way it strikes me that what we need to see is some kind of multilateral engagement between the so-called authorities of this region to be, and the heads of the development agencies in those regions, talking across the boundaries of the region, whether they're formal or informal. Obviously in a place like Lebanon you have so much fragmentation within the governance, but that's the level that we're talking about. So I don't, who is calling? The question is, who's calling for that type of conversation? So that's not the development banks. This is a political, a transnational political project. And which agencies are leading that type of a call?
Well, I think the answer is none.
Thank you. Actually, I have a question for Mr. Rabih, Mr. Shibli. There was a meeting last month in the World Bank with the Lebanese government, or representative of the Lebanese government, regarding trying to assist the Lebanese government to face the Syrian crisis impact on Lebanon. What was the outcome of that meeting? We didn't have any real, fundamental outcome of this meeting. And before you answer, if I may just have a comment on what Mr. Phillips said. If you allow me, you cannot, compare the situation of the Mexicans or the Somalians or whoever is living in the States to what we're having either in Lebanon or in Jordan. First, we need to ask the Syrians, do they want to be called as immigrants? Because migrating is a decision that the person take. Actually, they were forced to move either to Lebanon or to Jordan. Second, is the Lebanese society and the Jordanian society ready to accept them, integrate them in their own community. I don't think it's the case, at least the case of Lebanon. So I think we're asking a bit too much over the capacity of those two countries, not to forget that Lebanon already has its own sectarian problems. So adding 2 million Syrian to the Lebanese community, I think would create a bigger mess. It wouldn't be a solution. That's my opinion. Thank you.
2 months ago, we were in a meeting, and the very honest ambassador said that he was told by our caretaker prime minister, no, don't deal with us. We're a very corrupt government. We're ranked at, I think, 147 from 170 on the level of corruption. So we don't have the trust of the international community. That's why they're opening up their own channels. They're always, there's a big frustration in Lebanon within the governance that we're not receiving support. The president is saying that whenever he's going, the caretaker prime minister, everyone is saying that. We know that, we know these facts, but Lebanon cannot deal with this crisis and this unprecedented scale with the same conventional approach. We need something unconventional. When I tested the idea of engaging them in municipal public works along ecological lines, I was very precise in choosing every word. And when I tested it with one of the professors who I really admire, he told me, he said, wow, that's a very good idea. This is what happened in the US during the big recession. They opened up the railways. So I think this idea of maybe if we can do that, this is something which is temporary, won't compete with the local market, well-defined, and which is benefit to the host communities. They can go for Lebanon, most of the fields, the areas, we have at least 40% municipal or governmental land, uncultivated. The refugees can cultivate the land, terrace, level the land. The Lebanese won't do that. The Lebanese will look at them as an asset, not as an obstacle. They can go for rainwater harvesting, reclaiming the ponds. We can go reclaiming the riverbanks. We can have so many wonderful ideas that the Lebanese will look at the refugees as an asset. We need to find the mechanism. The only mechanism, the only loophole I found within our structure are the muhafazat, the governance. And it's not by chance and coincidence that the international agencies are working within the same model but detached from the local system. They are working in a decentralized model, exactly the same. If you look at the TOR of area manager with UN agencies, it's the same TOR as the muhafiz. Same thing. But this one is more equipped, more technically, financially equipped, and that one is kept in the dark. The Lebanese have to deal with it. We need to know these facts. I will start lobbying for the proposal. At least I haven't heard of any other proposal. It's for our bad luck. Like I said, there hasn't been serious debate. And I think we're turning the blind eye. But it's there, and it's increasing, and it's exacerbating, and they won't be leaving anytime soon.
So there's a number of hands. So what I think we'll do is I will call on 3 people, and we'll lay out 3 questions, and then see which maybe there'll be some convergence of those questions. So one there, and one in the back. Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about relief, development versus relief, immigrants versus refugees. Long-term versus short-term or temporary. So since Lebanon, Jordan are very still developing economies, there are a lot of, the market is almost saturated, there's a lot of high employment, there's a lot of immigration actually out, Lebanese are immigrating outside of Lebanon, same with Jordanians. So what is the option of resettling the Syrian refugees or immigrants to more less politically volatile countries such as the GCC countries, which are rich, whose market is already absorbing a lot of Arabs and labor from other countries. So that's my question.
This one. Second, here it is.
In terms of infrastructure reliance upon Jordan, for instance, so Jordan is the second most water poor country in the world, as I recall. So is there anything being done on that particular front to address those needs?
Just one first a comment. I think it's interesting
that you mentioned the fact that Lebanese are feeling that Syrians are taking away jobs, and it's also interesting that Lebanese labor law doesn't cover non-Lebanese, which in a sense I believe was in order to protect Lebanese, but then in a sense it's also promoting the creation of an underground economy, which is really very problematic. I wanted to ask how people have responded to this decentralization proposal, or whether you've been able to actually give that proposal to different organizations.
Why don't we take one more?
Yeah, we've heard about, this question is for Pablo. We've heard about the outbreak of polio again in Syria. I wanted to ask what measures are being taken by NSF and other NGOs.
Okay, all right. Who wants to pick up something?
You go for a second. Oh, a second.
Like I mentioned at the beginning, this proposal we've tested all of the ideas on a very small scale. They work, and maybe after I go back to Lebanon, I will be kind of lobbying for it. We have to lobby for it. There isn't any other solution. We have to lobby for it with the UN officials, head of missions, and we have to lobby with it. At least propose it for the decision makers, the stakeholders. And the decision makers, stakeholders in Lebanon are the godfathers. So they need to be very well aware of what's happening and test an idea, throw an idea on the table with them, and let's hear more alternatives. I don't see any other alternative. We need the money of the GCC countries. We need the money of the international community, because Lebanon have very meager and weak financial resources, but we need the money to be spent in the most efficient way. A very small example on this. One of the, also from the July war, when they came in, one big NGO had 350,000 euros to be spent in 6 months. So they went in under the water and sanitation. So they went into the village and decided to do septic tanks, the real good ones, with the 2 compartments of concrete with pebbles on one side, filtration on the other side. So they went and they didn't take into consideration that there isn't any form of infrastructure that supports such intervention in this village, and they don't even have a car to pump out all the everything that's gonna stay there, and which needs to be cleaned every 3 months. So the villagers didn't say anything. When the NGO left, they turned it into rainwater harvesting. They needed water. You really have to reconcile between the money, the international funds, and the local needs, which are very basic. We are running on 2 different and separate tracks. Let's reconcile them. We need your support and money, but just be modest and be. My main concern in this field, in the last meeting in one of the big embassies, they're calling it's a relief business. She was welcoming all of those who work in the relief business, and they were all like, no one have disagreed. So I told her, I'm not in the business, but if it's a business, let's do a proper business, a profitable one.
I'll go to the question about the formal and informal economy. And I'll go back to your comment about Lebanon being overwhelmed by the volume of people coming in. I'm sure that's true, okay? The fact of the matter is that the parallels for Syria's exodus today are things like the Chinese warlord era, or the end of World War II, the IDPs inside of Central and Western Europe. But if you take away people's ability to make money legally, they will either be completely unemployed, or they will make money informally or illegally. And this does happen at the small scale. Overqualified people take whatever they can take. So if you look at the history of massive immigration, Boston was overrun by Irish in 1853, and it was a scale, different times, but it was a big scale. It does lead to urban violence. It leads to organized crime. It leads to smuggling on a massive scale. Eventually, it leads to political violence and political economy. And my point is simply, all of those things are going to happen if you keep doing the things that you're currently doing. So I'm with you. If you know, let's get out of the quote relief business. Let's get out of the business of treating this as a containable humanitarian problem. If a problem cannot be solved, expand it. Now, what that leads you to, though, is if there's a completely dysfunctional government, that's not a place that you're going to try to build this in, because when you put in the training wheels and your political scaffolding, you can never get rid of it. That's been Haiti's curse for 50 years.
Yes, regarding the polio cases in Syria, so yes, there has been a confirmation of several cases of polio in children in Syria in the last weeks, and we need to take into consideration, first of all, that in the last 2 years, in many parts of the country, there has been no vaccination at all. So basically, the population at risk is very high, and that the risk is not only in Syria. In fact, there is also in Iraq and even in southern Turkey, areas where many children have not been vaccinated. And the concern is not only regional, even the European authorities are very worried of immigrants now coming with polio and a new polio outbreak eventually happening in Europe. Unfortunately, it's really difficult to deal with it now because the cases, many of the cases have happened in areas which are under, I would say, at least under partial control of jihadist movements. We are, as MSF, we are working in coordination with the WHO, and we are trying to negotiate with the actors who are in charge in these areas to allow our teams to get inside and to do vaccination. But honestly, it's extremely difficult, and we do not know we'll be able to do it.
So we have 5 more minutes, and we'll take a few more questions and then have final comments from the panel. Anybody else have questions?
I just want to ask, effectively, how can the Arab diaspora help? What is the most effective way how the Arab diaspora here in North America and in Europe can help?
And there's one question.
With respect to the professor's recommendation, I'm wondering if you're concerned about pushback from municipalities in Lebanon and sort of distributing refugees at the end of the day along sectarian lines. I imagine for a lot of refugees, we don't want a situation where Sunnis end up in Sunni municipalities, and I just don't imagine that they would be able to reintegrate in villages that are majority Shia at this point in time, for example.
One more.
My question is to Pablo. So what's the impact of the conflict on Syria's healthcare? Like how many healthcare professionals in the country and nurses and
We'll have some final comments.
That's why I'm here. I came to lobby for the Arabs living in America. I don't like flying. I travel like, and an economy, it's really, I really don't like flying. But we really need support. And I think the core base of the support is to lobby. You need to know about the facts. We really need to know that it's our problem. When I'm having the refugees in Lebanon, it's not them living in the misery, I'm living in the misery. We're all living in the ordeal. So to begin with, I will lobby for the people of the Levant. Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, we're dealing with it on a daily basis. To extend it, anyone who talks Arabic, let's lobby for it. We need to lobby. This is the only way politics work. It is a political game, by all means. We're dealing with the crisis, development, reconstruction, redevelopment, whatever you want to call it. But then we really need to know what's happening and lobby for solutions and discuss it and have like solid discussions about what is it that we want to have by next month, next year. What are the forums that we're going to attend? What are the mechanisms that we have to address? Have we failed? Can we push the guideline? But not just look at the death, like the number of killings on each day and just turn the black eye. This is what's happening. We don't have the mechanism for the Arabs to lobby for anything. We can fight on all sorts of ideas. ideology, racism, economy, God, nature, anything. We have to start finding a mechanism to deal with. We are living in an axis of crisis. We are jumping from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And we don't have even one school for development or crisis management in the Arab world. The only school I found was in London. They study us remote sensing. I'm serious. And when I go out there and discuss it, you know, why would they understand why would I open up a school of development to study the Americans? Why would I do that? Why would I have someone from the US going to Lebanon to study about the needs of people living in Boston? Go study it over there. It's a big problem. This is the first question. The second one on the municipalities, they're spilling over everywhere. First they came into the Bekaa and the north where the Sunni majorities is. Last year there were maybe maximum of 5% in South Lebanon where the Shias are. Now you have 25% of the refugees in Shia areas. Mazboot, Lebanon is based on a very fine sectarian system which also cannot be sustained on a long term. But they're like filling into any space. They're going to anywhere that they can, because the country is saturated. So there ain't any more areas where we're not going there because they're not going to accept us. They're filling in all the spaces.
So regarding the health situation now in Syria, so I will speak mostly about the opposition health areas, which are the areas I know better. So the UN data says that 50% of the whole structures in the country, health structures, hospitals and health centers, have been either destroyed or severely damaged. Between 60 and 80% of the Syrian doctors have fled the country. Okay? And this is if we see the country as a whole. No? So if we focus in the opposition health areas, it's much worse. So for example, in Aleppo, before the war, there were around 2,000 doctors in Aleppo, 2,000 medical staff, sorry, I'm not sure now, medical staff or doctors. Now there are between 30 and 50 doctors in the whole city. So you can imagine how difficult it is to deal with this. So who is working in these areas? So if we think of the relief agencies, they have very, very little presence. So the UN and the ICRC, the International Committee for Red Cross, they have a lot of difficulties to work in these areas because of mandate issues. Basically, they need the approval of the Syrian government to work there, and the Syrian government is not granting this approval very often. And the Western NGOs is also for them extremely difficult because of security issues. Basically because of, as I was explaining, the combats are still there, and the jihadist groups are extremely suspicious of foreigners moving around the country. So who is doing the work there? So fortunately, there are people doing this work. There are, honestly, authentic heroes. For example, the doctors, Syrian doctors staying in Aleppo, working almost 24 hours a day, moving from one hospital to the other. They are doing this job. There are networks of Syrian Americans or Syrian Europeans who are basically funneling money, drugs, and even bringing people from time to time to work there. There are some rich people from Gulf countries who are also providing strong funding to hospitals in these areas. The Muslim Brotherhood also, they are quite strong, in fact, in Aleppo, also providing health services there. But honestly, my perception is that it's not enough. Clearly, the needs are much larger, and I think that the big challenge now is to find a way for these, I would say, traditional relief actors to be able to collaborate much closer with the basically Arab actors who are in the field and who are really doing a great job. And we have not been able to do it yet, probably because of all this, fear of Western actors to provide funds or material that will be like channeled basically to jihadist actors. But we need to find a way, honestly, because the situation now is really bad, and the people who are doing the work now are clearly unable to do it.
No, I'll save it for my last comment.
No, this is your last.
Oh, this is my last comment?
Sorry to say it.
And we thank you for your support. The solution will come small up. It will be in small towns and small communities. It may be faith-based. There will be the sectarian kinds of things. The dislocation relative to the scale of the countries involved is like the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947-48. It's like the Chinese warlord era. We are dealing with something that is not fixed quickly. My experience, though, is that when people live together and start to share even the simplest things, over time that dislike of the other gradually goes away. But I'm not here to tell you this is going to get fixed anytime soon. And you know, there are 4 million Zimbabweans living in South Africa, most of them in the slums of Johannesburg and Soweto. Black-on-black violence there is extremely high. When you have large immigrant populations who come in, they connect ethnically to people they know, they get discriminated against, and horrible things happen. So we are not done with horrible things happening in the aftermath of this, even if the conflict were over tomorrow, which it won't be.
To close the panel, I just want to say that it's clear to me from everybody's comments and the questions that this is we are at a critical moment in this field of refugee crisis development, and that we need to start thinking seriously as academic institutions. I'm really with you. And just carve out a better understanding of this problem with new language, with different assumptions. I'm so inspired by what you're doing in Lebanon. I wanted to put a shameless plug for the fact that we are also realizing at the GSD that this is something that we in the planning and design field have not really been able to make a difference, and we're trying to rethink the paradigm. That's why we've created a new master design program in risk and resilience. And the 3 dimensions that we are looking at in that program are understanding how people live in environmental vulnerabilities, economic vulnerabilities, and with respect to violence. And those 3 things are coming together in very disastrous ways in the refugee crisis situation. And we just need to work harder to learn how to do something constructive. And I want to thank our panelists for their wonderful presentations and for their commitment to making a difference, and thank you all for coming today.